Hey everyone, I am so thrilled to welcome you to the first episode of Justice Talks with the New York Women's Foundation. I'm Nina Rogers, pronouns she, her, and I'm your host. Whether you're already a friend of the foundation or just getting to know us a little bit, we're really grateful to have you here. The New York Women's Foundation is a platform for women and non-binary people and a force for change. And on this platform, when we say women, we unequivocally mean cis and trans women. Our mission is to create an equitable and just future for all women and girls. And we do this by investing in women-led, innovative, and bold community-based solutions that promote justice. Now let's take a step back for a minute and get real. The last year and a half has been tough. Between a global pandemic and economic stressors, many of us are just trying to hold it all together. The foundation recognizes the toll this has taken on our communities, and in particular, women of color, queer and trans, gender nonconforming individuals, people with disabilities, and immigrants. And it's with that recognition that we're taking action to advance wellness and healing for communities that have been historically and collectively facing violence and trauma. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of healing justice and how our grantee partners and supporters like you can create sustainable, community-centered healing practices. I'm Nina Rogers, and this is Justice Talks. Today, I'm so excited to welcome our inaugural guest to Justice Talks, Yolo Akili. He's founder and executive director of our grantee partner, Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, better known as BEAM, and has been a leader in progressive wellness work for more than 15 years. He's a writer and yoga teacher who has a commitment to wellness informed by social justice. It's my pleasure to welcome Yolo to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Nina. Excited to talk to you today.
Super excited to have you on board. I know you're on West Coast time, so thank you for joining us. Let's dive right into things. You got your start in public health as an HIV/AIDS counselor. So how did you make that pivot into the work that you're doing now? And what was the moment that set you out on that path?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. For me, it wasn't necessarily a pivot. It was really an expansion, right, of the work that I was doing. When I first started doing HIV and AIDS work, I was doing just primarily HIV testing, right? Giving people, negative or positive results for living, whether or not they were living with HIV. But in those sessions, often so much more would come up, right? Whether it was other things they were navigating, other distress they were holding. And it really made me recognize that while HIV cannot be held in this one silo, it is connected to so many dimensions of wellness, whether it's mental health, whether it's emotional health, physical health, environmental, all those different pieces. And so for me, as I was a counselor, I started learning more and training, getting more education and tools and insight on how to support our folks particularly around various different forms of distress, not just focusing on HIV, but holding HIV and also looking at other dimensions, if that makes sense.
It wasn't necessarily a pivot for you. This has basically been your life's work. So that's dope. And thinking about this moment now where the last year has been full of chaos, I guess to say the least, it's been hard for a lot of folks. But with that, I think a lot of wellness practices have been, more in the mainstream now. People seems a little bit more open to talking about mental health struggles, therapy, and the like. But I think we also know that a lot of traditional wellness practices are not accessible to the communities that we serve at BEAM and here at the foundation. So how can, in this movement now for wellness, how do we begin to remove those barriers to make care and the wellness practices that we need for our communities more accessible?
Absolutely. This is a great question. There are two pieces that I think of immediately when you ask this question. The first piece is, I think, on a policy level, we have to continue to advocate for universal health care, thinking about advocating for a living wage for our folks, making healthcare accessible for our folks. That is a critical piece, right? And make sure we're expanding what healthcare is even understood to be, right? So also understanding that doula support for Black folks is also a critical part of wellness, right? understanding the other other modalities of healing besides just talk therapy are also critical components of healing. So we need to continue to challenge state policy, federal policy, local policy to be more inclusive and to give more dollars towards innovative community health strategies, right? That's one thing I immediately think of that needs to happen. The second piece is, I believe that we also have to create our own care systems and continue to uplift and enshrine the systems we have. When I say create new care systems or uplift what we have, I'm thinking about in Black communities how we have traditions of kitchen table healing. We have traditions of healers in our communities who are doing amazing work within religious and without outside of religious institutions. We need to think about how do we uphold and support those strategies? How do we uplift them? How do we also build, peer support networks, which is a big part of our work, right? Like I've always said that Black people in this country have never gone to therapy in the way we think about therapy in large numbers ever, right? This is really kind of what the beginning, last couple of years, we're seeing this influx, right? But we've always had tools to heal. And so what were those tools? Those tools might have been sharing at a book club, you're reading a book and you're processing things with the people you're in conversation with about what's going on. It's the ways in which we already develop care systems, wraparound services for our folks who are living with diabetes or other chronic illnesses, the ways in which we show up for them to make sure who's taking so-and-so to the doctor, who's taking so-and-so, make sure they got the meals, right? There's a lot of care strategies we have. And so I think we have to strengthen those, refine them. And then just because they're informal doesn't mean they're legitimate, right? Like illegitimate, excuse me. They are very legitimate. I think we need to get more support for them, whether that support be economic or also be social.
Incredible what you mentioned in terms of the community-based systems of support and how critical that is. I'm curious, what do those models look like, for folks that maybe aren't in community in that way, but want to implement that, whether it's with the people they love, their friends, what does that look and feel like for you?
So many of our folks, when I talk about Black people, our first encounters with the mental health industrial complex often come in conjunction with the criminal legal system or the prison industrial complex, right? I think that sometimes when a lot of people are thinking about therapy, they're thinking like this cushy couch and this gorgeous office where I'm sitting down and talking about my feelings like it's brunch on Sunday, but that's not the ways in which most of our folks have experienced the mental health industrial complex, right? It's often been punitive. It's often been a lot less compassionate. And sometimes it's actually been more medication management centric than it's actually been about care for the individual as a whole person, right? I think that's such a big piece to lift up. Going back to your question, what those care systems look like. So for example, our Black Mental Health and Healing Justice Peer Support Program is literally built for that, right? It's built on the premise that we can't rely on social workers and therapists only for our communities to heal. Everyone has to have tools and skills. And so when you come to that training, regardless of where you are, and we have people who are barbers and hairstylists and community activists and big mamas and all kinds of folks who come there, the goal is how to support you with cultivating everyday wellness and disrupting some of the toxicity that kind of runs in our communities due to the nature of racism and transphobia and homophobia. Giving you skills and tools to practice wellness, giving you skills and tools to practice boundaries, giving you skills and tools to discern when someone's having quote unquote everyday distress and when this might be something that requires a broader psychological intervention, right? That is how we continue to build up care networks for our communities, because the more tools each of us have, the more we're able to share with each other and build it through our network. And that's how we cultivate wellness. It's a model that is really community centric as opposed to being just individual centric. You know what I mean? Or even affirming that while there are valuable tools that we can get from the traditional clinical mental health industrial complex, going to therapy once a week for an hour, it might not be substantial for me if I don't have a community that's supporting me and wrapping me around with more information that's helping me heal and support, right? So it's really critical that we build communities. And that's where our work really centers. Peer support, or what I call village care, is really a more sustainable, in my opinion, option for us. Because when we look at Black therapists, I remind people all the time, when we talk about people everybody Black wants a Black therapist, and I'm like, that's wonderful. And I wish that was more of a reality. There are about 42 million Black people in this country. There are 820 Black psychiatrists in the country, right? We're talking about 15,000 licensed professional counselors, right? So we break these numbers down, we end up about 25, 30,000 people who are in that realm doing wellness work, right? So that's we gotta continue to support getting more counselors and therapists, but we also gotta get our Reikis, our pastor teachers, our yoga teachers, our big mamas and cousins, people who run it. We need to get them some more skills so they can show up and know how to support. And we also gotta think about other strategies because that strategy, we're a long way out from having that access to therapy for all of our folks, you know?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful what you say about wellness being something community minded. I think especially now it's something that thought of collectiveness is it's almost counter to how we operate, as Americans in this country, where everything is very self-sufficient. There's something you mentioned around your hope to, and I hope I say it right, your hope for everyone to increase like their toolkit, I guess, of mental wellness. So if you could dream up maybe three things that everyone should have in that mental wellness toolkit, what would those be?
Yeah, this is a great question. And so let me preface it by saying everyone's toolkit looks different based off of what they need and based off of who they are. So thinking about, I think everybody has to figure out what are the things that help sustain, nourish, and ground me, and what does that look like, right? So for my tool belt, it might be my yoga practice daily. It might also be my faith, going to church. It might also be eating certain kinds of foods. It might also be medication, right? Your toolbox or your toolkit might look different. You might need other things, like you might need acupuncture. You might need Reiki. You might need like your Sunday brunch with your friends, right? Like, these are a variety of different practices, but we have to kind of take the time to sit and feel what helps me feel nourished and grounded, and how do I cultivate my life where that practice is a part of my everyday being, right? And so wherever I am in my journey, what does that look like? If it's, like I said, if it's therapy, it's medication, it's plant gardens, etc., how do I make that center to my life? And also understanding that every tool can be useful, but every tool isn't always useful in every scenario. Like, I talk to our folks a lot, right? So, some things that come up as healing tools are like apple cider vinegar. And I'd be like, yes, we love apple cider vinegar, y'all, but that's not going to cure if you're, depression, right? Like, you know what I mean? That's not going to, you know, navigate, like you're not going to have panic attacks anymore. Like there's going to have to be other interventions. It's not saying that the tool is not useful. It's saying that the tool has limitations. Like,
Yeah.
so we have to think about what tool are we pulling out to address the issue? I tell people all the time, we talk about prayer in our community. It's like prayer is a powerful tool for stress relieving, for anxiety, for connection with our faith. I will never dismiss prayer as a tool for our wellness. However, we have to understand that prayer has to be in conjunction sometimes with other things too, right? That I might need my prayer and I might also need to look at my diet and how it's contributing to my wellness. Or I might also need to talk to a therapist, right? That like everything has a utility and is critical. It's just that sometimes we have to supplement and build a whole, almost like a smorgasbord of practices for ourselves. And I think that's an important piece, and really helping people making sure people have access to um, care in that way. And I think that's why so many community organizations across the country that, Beam's grateful to be in collaboration with and we support are doing that work with the wellness days, the people who are doing like the pop-up wellness massages and Reiki and yoga, the people who are doing the mental health walks and like different things, the yoga out in the street. Those are all how we create collective wellness. And I think they need to be celebrated, uplifted, and continued for our folks to continue to cultivate wellness.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about what some of your practices are, like yoga and things, but how do you stay grounded, especially as a leader in this work? I think one thing that folks may sometimes take for granted is, especially in the nonprofit, philanthropic, and social justice space, is that the people doing the work are also people, who are come from the same communities that we are also servicing. So, or serving, I should say. So how do you stay grounded? How do you take care of yourself? What's in your wellness toolkit?
Now, there are definitely some practices that I do to help myself get to grounded. I try to maintain grounding, right? And to different effect depending on what I'm navigating and what I'm trying to move through. Some of those, of course, like I think I've shared earlier, like, I have my yoga practice, I have a therapist. I also go to Reiki, which is really powerful and healing for me. But in addition, cultivating a community that supports me that is also on a healing journey, and we share and reinforce each other's healing journey, I would say has actually been the most powerful intervention that I've had. Because even though I have the therapist I talk to once a week, it's my best friend Moya who is on her own healing journey that we talk and we actually support each other more than the therapist does, right? Because we're sharing things we're learning along our healing journey. It's my friends, my community that is really a source of support. And so I always think about this quote, and I'm probably not going to say it correctly, but I hope she forgive me. Susan Taylor says often, building a life that reminds you of your sacredness, but also centers wellness every day. And I'm thinking about, how do I do that with the folks I spend time with the community I connect with? What does that look like? And that intervention for me is more critical than almost all of them, because I feel like when I'm not doing my yoga, I might have a friend who can help me reground, right? When I'm not, this is when I miss a therapy appointment or maybe miss taking my medication. When there's a community be like, hey, okay, wait, what's going on here? Let's bring you back over here. That is the intervention. I think that's community. Community that is centered and rooted in love and dignity. Let me make sure I distinguish that, because not just any community. Community that is centered in love and dignity and social justice and healing justice, I think is one of the most powerful interventions and tools we can have for healing.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And also, in the spirit of butchering quotes, there was something that you said in a video I watched of yours, that the life that we're saving may be our own. And I think that comes up a lot when we're in community with folks and we're, showing up for one another. Sometimes, it can take a level of vulnerability, to let someone know what you're going through. But I think in doing that, it's also healing ourselves, in the midst of showing up for each other. So the work you're doing is so needed in the world, so necessary, and so powerful. Before we get out of here, tell me, what is justice to you?
Ooh, what a complicated term. No big questions, Nina. It's like, just what
It
is
wouldn't be me if I didn't know the
justice?
foundation, if we didn't get you with something to think through at the end.
Yeah, I would be honest with you in that I'm not sure if I know what that is. I think that I've been in so many spaces and scenarios, working, whether working with people who have committed harm, who are going through restoration practices, to supporting people who've been in distress and in their distress showed up in ways that were harmful. I have had so many experiences that I think I'm not clear on a definitive term of what that looks like. Because I think in every situation there, justice has been defined very differently, and it's really given me an opportunity to continue to seek out what that looks like for me. What restorative justice looks like for me, what transformative justice looks like for me. And I don't have the complete answer. I wish I could say I did. I can say that it's a journey, and that I think that it's also a journey that for me feels very somatic, and it feels very, when I say somatic, it feels like an embodied journey, that I'm trying to learn what justice feels like in my body, what justice feels like in the bodies of other folks who I'm loving and supporting our community with. And so I think it's an ongoing search, um, and I'm just on that journey trying to figure it out, like with everyone else.
That's real. And I appreciate that. I think that's what we're all here to do together. Figuring out what justice is in a way of, like, those pillars that you mentioned, of love and compassion to one another. So Yolo, I want to thank you so very much for your time today. It has been my greatest joy to have you as the inaugural guest to Justice Talks. So thank you again, as always, for your time, your leadership, and your expertise. You are a great friend of the foundation, and we're so proud to invest in your leadership and that of all of your staff and team at Beam, and all the great work that you're doing. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Thank you so much to the foundation for the amazing work that you continue to hold and continue to lead the way for so many of our folks. So much appreciation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you for watching another episode of Justice Talks. We'll be back soon for another episode you won't want to miss. Until then, there are plenty of ways for us to stay connected. To stay up to date on everything about Justice Talks and the New York Women's Foundation, you can sign up for email updates at nywf.org/sign up. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at NYWomen'sFDN, or search us on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn at the New York Women's Foundation. If you want to support the work of organizations like you saw today, you can make a gift to the foundation by texting Justice Talks to 44321. Thanks again for tuning into Justice Talks. I'm your host, Nina Rogers, and we'll see you again next time.